if you believe that people are basically good, you become the most judgmental kind of person imaginable.
Hi, welcome to Jeremy Pryor's podcast, or what I like to call Jeremy Pryor Unfiltered. I'm his daughter and producer, Kelsey Gall, and we are excited to bring you seasons of content all the way from Tolkien to theology, from business to family. If you like to contemplate deep philosophical ideas across a wide range of topics, you've come to the right place. Make sure you give us a follow so you don't miss out on future episodes.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. I am back with my lovely daughter, Sydney Grace Partial. How's it going, Sid?
Good. How are you?
Good. Awesome. We like your new studio. Looks great.
Thank you.
Awesome. So, okay, I wanted to walk through with you Dennis Prager's greatest hits. 2, maybe 3. We'll see how much time we have. But I think that Dennis Prager is one of the most articulate and interesting describers of what's happening, what happens when a secular culture takes root. And I think that his thoughts are much more advanced and clear than most of what I hear. So there's a couple of questions he's answering in this interview that I thought, wow, okay, this kind of combines some of the things that as I've been kind of watching, reading his books and kind of like paying attention to his content, I'm like, okay, this is like summarizing some of his greatest insights. And I think these are so important. So I think that he gets this first one, the root of why there's such moral confusion in the world. So I'll play this for you. And I'm very curious what your thoughts are about this. Here we go.
15 chapters. It was a long course. The one thing I remember is, he said there was one tribe that it was really difficult for the Catholic Church to convert to Christianity. And I'm thinking, okay, which is the Germanic. And he said they didn't understand why it was wrong to kill. If you're strong, you kill. And by the way, that's a completely rational argument. If I can prevail by killing, why wouldn't I kill?
Every culture that I've ever read about has this position until the sort of the Christian, Judeo-Christian moral ethic begins to saturate a culture. And so, yeah, it's fascinating to think about how long it took for the Germanic tribes, which were very much based on, survival of the strongest. If you can conquer your enemy, why would you do it? And this is very normal. It's the way the Greeks thought, the Romans thought, virtually every culture before they encounter Christianity.
People think because we've been so Judeo-Christianized, they think that those values are instinctual. They're not. People are so naive. Here's another Prager rule number 473. I just made up the number, but I have a lot of rules. Wisdom begins with understanding that human nature is not basically good. If you think human nature is basically good, you cannot be wise. It is not possible.
True.
Almost everything else you believe will be foolish. So that's essential to Judaism and Christianity from Genesis, where God himself says, the will of man's heart is towards evil from his youth. God himself makes that declaration. That's a big deal. And so if you don't figure out how to deal with flawed human nature, and I never say we're basically evil. I've never said that, nor does the Bible, but we're not. But the inclination is towards bad stuff. It's easier to cheat on a test than not to cheat on a test. I'll come back to this in one moment. I give real life examples.
And he's going to tell a story. Takes a little while, but he tells a story about how he nicked somebody's car, left a note, and the reason why he left a note, and the person who eventually called him was very surprised. He said, because I believe in God. And but his thesis here, which I think is so important, is that one of the building blocks for being wise is the belief that human beings are bent towards evil. There's a bent towards evil within our kind of our anthropology, the way we're basically made. And so this is a huge dividing wall between Christians, the Judeo-Christian belief about the world, and sort of the secular idea of the world. And at first blush, it sounds to people very much like very judgmental, and like, why would you say that? Why would look at a baby? They're basically good. Like they're born, they're good. They're and it's always society that corrupts, and so they see Christians or Judeo Christians as being hyper judgmental against humanity by holding this position that we get from the Bible. The ironic thing about this is that if you believe that people are basically good, you become the most judgmental kind of person imaginable, because the only explanation for why you're doing bad things is something that all your inclinations are good. And so you must really be an outlier of an evil, horrible person if you're doing bad things. If all your heart-based inclinations are towards good and you've resisted all of that, then of course you must judge people extremely harshly. It also causes people to believe that every bit of evil must be societal or come from some kind of systemic cause, because if you just left people alone, they would be good. And therefore, if people stop being good, there's always going to be a societal reason. This is why leftists cannot judge Hamas for what's going on in the Gaza Strip. Because the only explanation, if every one of those children that are now grown up and have joined Hamas, if every single one of them are basically good and have all this goodness inclined to them, then it must be the horrible circumstances that Israel has enforced on the Gaza Strip, the Palestinians, the Hamas members, that caused all this evil. So they will then blame others. In other words, when you believe that people are basically evil, that there is an inclination towards evil, then you tend to have a lot of grace for humans, because you know that they're fighting in a really difficult uphill battle to become good. And then you want to have all kinds of structures focused on how to disciple or grow the individual. If you think that people are born basically good, then you don't need to do anything for the individual. Everything goes against society and these societal things that are caused. So racism, for
Whoever's in
example,
power.
yeah, that's always the explanation, is some kind of bad. That's why we have to get control of power. That's why we have to somehow create a utopian society, because it's the only way to make sure that society doesn't continuously corrupt people that are basically good. So this, you guys, you have to understand how like this just changes the nature, and it makes people unwise at the very foundation of their thinking, because all of their thinking then gets predicated on this basic assumption. And so one of the things that Dennis Prager is constantly pointing out is we have to start with this incredibly deep foundational first principle. What do you think about humanity? Are humans basically good and corrupted by kind of evil systems, evil societies, people that have resisted all this goodness in their heart and become evil and then are creating this for the next generation? Or do you think that people are in a terrible fight inside of their own heart against evil inclinations, and that what we all need to do is go down to the level of the individual and help them, help rescue them, and help train them and give them access to divine revelation, to good training? So there's a lot here to unpack, but I love this theme of Dennis Prager's, that he's boiled it down to this single foundational belief, theology of what do you think about humanity? So yeah, I said, what did that start for you?
That's so interesting, because something so seemingly simple can really change everything.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting and really cool that he is able to even identify that, because it's hard to simplify things that much. But yeah, so I think it's cool that he did that. Um I guess I wonder so the Germanic people that he was saying, or that he was talking about, do you think they believed that people were inherently evil?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that their framework, their moral framework, was based on what some basic natural principles, and this is what's so difficult for people that swim in Judeo-Christian ethics and morality. Everybody in the West is swimming in neck deep in these ideas. It's hard to understand that, like, if you were a part of a Germanic tribe, or we talked before about, like, in the Iliad, when you see it's just they're celebrating within these Greek writings strength and killing your enemy, and this is what's heroic. But in virtually every movie or long narrative in a Judeo-Christian world, there's this thread of, you don't want to have the hero of the story conquer the evil person. You want to have them somehow resist, like doing the same thing to them, right? And so you constantly have this trope of, right when the hero's winning, they sort of decide to let the evil person go, or let kind of natural consequences play out, but they don't want to be the one responsible for killing. Whereas that's just considered by by these Germanic tribes, and like I said, virtually every other civilization that isn't steeped in some kind of religion that changes this. The natural way you would think is, yeah, conquer your enemies. I mean, it's going to make your family safer. It's going to make your life safer. You're doing your duty, and it's a moral good to make sure that you wipe them out, like you completely destroy them. So to all of a sudden have Christianity come into warrior societies like the Vikings or the Germans, and then tell them, hey, like, lay down your life for the vulnerable. Like, don't use your power to gain more power. Use your power to lift up the weak. Understand that these inclinations that are so natural to you, that you're giving into, your natural inclination for revenge, your natural inclination for putting your family safety above any consideration of the life and the flourishing of other people, like, those are actually evil inclinations that are coming from your heart and need to be discipled out of you through contact with divine revelation, with the Holy Spirit, with the gospel. And so, yeah, that's, I think, what's happening is that the natural inclinations of the heart are what are assumed to be good in these cultures.
Okay.
And all of a sudden Christianity comes in and says, no, those natural inclinations actually are leading you towards evil. And therefore the natural inclinations of your heart are towards evil, which puts people in a very difficult bind. Okay, if I can't trust that, what do I trust? That's why we have the Bible. That's why we have the Holy Spirit. That's why we have the gospel.
Okay. So they just had like a different moral framework and they just thought that it was right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And it makes sense. It's logically cohesive that it's right.
Yeah.
And it's odd to say to somebody, and that's why he's saying that when the church bumped up against these warrior tribes, it took, sometimes hundreds of years of evangelism to cause them to understand the goodness. And oftentimes it was watching while, these missionary movements came into these tribes, and these people literally would lay down their lives and allow themselves to be killed, martyred for the sake of the gospel. And it starts to really work on these warrior cultures to say, wow, what, like, this takes tremendous bravery. Who is this God that you're worshiping? So, so that's the way that, he's describing this. I think that then he kind of points out that in Genesis, all the way back to the very beginning, you have this really, and to me, the most foundational, obviously, parts of the Bible are in Genesis, and you have in the story of Adam and Eve, this, it's like, passing the buck. Like, it's the most natural thing you could possibly imagine, Adam saying, oh, it's the woman you made for me. She gave me the fruit and I ate it. And the woman, instead of taking responsibility, says, oh, the serpent deceived me, and that's why I ate it. What we have today in society, the secular society, is because they are blind to divine revelation. They don't understand the way that what's these natural desires kind of emanating from their own hearts. They can't discern which ones are evil, which ones are good. But they just the more natural it is, the more common it is, the more it must be assumed to be good. When that starts to take hold in a society, it's just the beginning of absolute moral chaos, because you don't have any resources to fight those evil inclinations, those acts of selfishness, right? Voltaire, who was another famous French atheist, or he was in Switzerland, I think. He said, like, I don't believe in God, but I really hope my maid believes in God. Which is to say, like, when people are alone and they are wrestling with their thoughts or their desires, then if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe that you're ultimately accountable, responsible to God, to kind of mediate some of these problems, then you're going to find a way to sidestep responsibility. And I think that what secular culture has done today is the ultimate move of sidestepping responsibility, which is to say everything that's wrong is somehow society's fault. It's never the individual's fault. And so whenever you see somebody struggling and they're in poverty and they're committing crime, it's the poverty's fault, right? It's never the person's fault. And so this allows everyone to live without any responsibility, essentially. And you sort of, have these two groups of people that are created within the secular framework. You have the infants, who are the people who are um, basically at the mercy of these horrible systems, these systemic problems in society that essentially is forcing them to commit these wrong acts, and therefore it's never their responsibility. And then you have the predators, and these are the people who are taking advantage of society, and they're the ones propping up these dangerous and divisive systems, and they're the ones who are causing all of the chaos. And so the prescription is very simple. So we have to protect the infants, we have to destroy the predators, and then we have to bring into existence the utopia, which is the society that will not create or not cause the infants, the young, it'll allow their natural goodness to come out. And therefore, once you've solved all these problems, once you've solved poverty, then you're going to just see goodness flourish naturally. It's just going to be like like a perfect garden. And that's their intuition. And it's this intuition that is so dangerous, because they don't understand that if you do that, if you create utopia and you do not deal with the problems in the human heart, then all you're doing is unleashing a completely different level of chaos. But now, because of your moral framework, you're not going to have any ability to combat it, because you won't understand why people continue to commit evil. You don't understand where evil actually comes from.
Have you ever considered starting a family business so you can spend more time working as a family team? We've started a year-long coaching program called Family Inc., where you get weekly coaching with Jeremy, access to our video training for launching family businesses, and lots of ideas for businesses to start that are working for other family teams. Head over to familyteams.com and click Family Inc. to learn more, or to set up a strategy call with Jeremy to see if this might be a good fit for you.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I've noticed about people with that framework of thinking that humans are inherently good, is that they're constantly finding people to blame,
Yeah.
but they're unable to come up with good solutions because they think the only solution is for like a complete, like you said, utopia, to create a society that would pump out these perfect individuals who have never been touched by evil and therefore aren't evil.
Yes.
Which is interesting. One of the many things that was interesting about the Snow White movie was that they kind of had to work around the whole fairest of them all thing.
Hmm.
And so they kind of, instead of saying that she was the most beautiful of them all, they kind of had the fairness thing mean like the most communist of them all.
Oh,
I don't
really?
know.
Oh,
the
wow.
most resource sharing of them all.
Hmm.
And so she's always talking about how when her parents were in power before the evil queen, everyone shared their resources and got, everyone got equal shares, like all these things, which is honestly it's a great design for a community. Like people are working and giving to each other and being very generous and very good. And then the thing that changed everything was the evil queen
Hmm.
and her ruler
Yeah.
the
Yes.
way that she chose to rule the land created the evil that was in it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's just rife with that
Mhm.
worldview that you're describing.
Yeah.
And
It's society, it's some kind of system, it's some kind of power structure that's creating a problem.
and the way that Snow White defeats her is by um bringing out the good that's in the people that are working for the queen.
Okay.
And
Yeah. By
so
finding that innate goodness, and then,
yes,
yes, creating the system that brings that to the surface.
correct.
Yeah.
So I feel like that's a perfect illustration of that.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. What's really crazy is it intentionally is attempting to hide the deep wisdom that's actually in Snow White, and it's such a deep wisdom. And you know that there's deep wisdom in a fairy tale when it lasts for hundreds or thousands of years and it gets retold. There's something in all of our intuitions that say, "Ooh, there's something true about that." And instead of trusting that process, that took a million fairy tales and brought us like the top 10, and Snow White being one of them, that there's something incredibly deep. We think, "Oh no, we can just rewrite this." In the themes that happen to be popular, this decade. And so it doesn't go through that incredibly difficult truth filter. But what I find so crazy is that the original Snow White is actually pointing out one of the most hidden truths within the human heart that we're talking about, that is so hidden that for a young woman, that she has to actually guard herself against it. And women today are completely at the mercy of this problem because we have not told them that this is an issue, and that is that there's something within the heart of older women that want to take revenge on younger women because of their beauty. That they are losing something, and it is really difficult. It's fascinating. I watched an interview of this 50-year-old supermodel. You know, she was a supermodel when she was in her 20s, and she was talking about this very openly. Like, I don't know why I'm not still, you know, this incredible sex icon at 50. It's totally unfair that these 25-year-olds, you know, she was just like so seething with resentment towards
Wow.
these younger women. And people don't realize, especially younger women don't realize that because there is this resentment of aging, of instead of gracefully going from, you know, maiden to mother to matriarch, becoming a grandmother and saying there's a new kind of beauty that I get to experience in this next season of my life, they instead take the revenge on younger women. And I think a lot of feminism is essentially the revenge of old women who have made terrible choices against younger women and destroying their future ability to do what their beauty is really intended to do, which is to find a mate, start a family, and begin the process of getting what a lot of these bitter older women have now lost. And I think that you have that in this wicked sort of stepmother theme, or wicked, you know, queen theme within a lot of fairy tales, which is it's warning younger women, hey, be careful. They seem like they're your friend. They're going to come to you, but it's going to come to you. They're going to feed you a poison apple. And that poison apple could destroy your ability to love someone and find the love of your life and settle down, because they have this resentment, and it's not very conscious. I don't think for a lot of women it's like, oh yeah, you know, and this is what's so, I think, incredibly important about fairy tales in general, is that they allow us to explore unconscious motivations that are within the human heart. But going back to, you know, our whole conversation, the problem with this ideology that says that people are basically good is it blinds us to the unconscious evil motivations, resentments, and things that we subtly do to really hurt each other, hurt the next generation, to play out those resentments in the course of our families, in the course of our society. And so when you look at, you know, like, of course, these older women who are, you know, doing everything they can to benefit, you know, and create a better society, they're only doing that out of the goodness of their heart because they're all basically good, without realizing that they could be creating a system to destroy those that they resent. Like that is oftentimes when you actually take a big step back and see what the results are of what they're creating, you're like, well, I don't understand why when these older women get to write books and have all this power and all this prestige, that when they write books and they give advice to younger women, it turns out that younger women, their lives get worse. Like, why does that happen? Like, why do their lives get worse? Why is it these ideologies that they're giving to them by angry older women causing them to not get into good relationships, not stay married, not have thriving families, not go from maiden to mother to matriarch? What a mystery. You know, it's not that mysterious if you start from the premise that people are wrestling with all kinds of evil inclinations in their heart, and that what needs to happen is a continual process of examination and repentance, of authenticity, and saying, wow, there's a lot going on in me. Like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, you know, the famous Russian novelist and philosopher, he's the one who said that evil is not between like this group of people or that group of people. Evil runs through the center of every human heart. And it's, if you're not in a process of trying to find those evil things within your heart and repenting and coming out of them, then they are going to be subtly, subconsciously working on you and giving you motivations that are going to lead to really, really bad outcomes for you and your family. And that's the power of the gospel, is to help us overcome this systemic problem of evil in the human heart. And the reason why we have divine revelation is to have a mirror to be able to like look at our actions, look at what we're doing and say, okay, is that good? Well, I kind of want to do that, but the Bible really is saying that that's wrong. But I want to do it, and I find it coming just naturally into my heart, this desire that Dennis Prager was describing, the desire to cheat. Okay, well, why is it that this desire is coming up? It's not surprising. And so you need divine revelation to sort of point out, hey, that desire, I know it's natural and I know that it's common, but it's also wrong. It's going to lead to the destruction of your soul and the destruction of those around you. So and now he kind of goes on and takes this to the next level. I want to play for you this second clip, which is, he then gets into this conversation about, you know, the instruments of our society for creating and for dispensing wisdom. are great universities. What has happened to them? And so this is another one of his great themes, I think, that he's able to get kind of to the bottom of. So I'll play this one for you next.
Wisdom is everything. Knowledge is not. The crisis, the moral crisis of the university, which are the morally most moronic institutions in the West, the universities. That's where people believe Stalin should be given nuclear secrets. Not everybody believed it, but that's where they came from, academia. Wisdom is much more important than knowledge and much more important than good intentions. Good intentions without wisdom leads to evil. Vast numbers of people supported communism from good intentions. Vast numbers. And they produced Gulag and Pol Pot and Mao and on a lesser extent Castro and so on. Good intentions are worthless without wisdom. They're worse than worthless. They're harmful. Wisdom is everything. And I'll give you a fascinating insight. I mentioned the Jewish liturgy for the Passover Seder. It's called the Haggadah. And I wrote the only non-biblical commentary I wrote is on it's called the Rational Passover Haggadah. So there's a story in there, it's thousands of years old, that the Torah speaks about 4 sons, the famous 4 sons. Almost every Jew who knows anything about Judaism knows the 4 sons. So there are 4 sons, and this is how you speak to each of them to explain the Exodus, because Passover is about the Exodus. So there is there's the evil son or bad son, there's the wise son, there's the son who is simple, and the son who doesn't know how to ask questions. When I was a kid, I realized there's no good son. And nobody pointed that out at the Passover Seder. There was a bad son and a wise son, not a bad son and a good son. Because the opposite of bad isn't good, it's wise. Vast numbers of people mean well and do awful things because they don't have wisdom. And here, this is a challenge to secular people. There are certainly secular people like you, and I'm not buttering you up, but like you, who are wise. But there is no wise secular institution. The most secular institutions are our universities, and they are the least wise institutions that we have in the Western world. There's more wisdom in a rural Iowa church than at Harvard. I truly believe that. Partially because they begin with people not basically good, and you need a God, and so on and so forth. So yes, that's the one thing I want to believe people with, wisdom. And that's a biggie. Good intentions are nothing.
All right. There's more wisdom in an Iowa rural church than at Harvard.
That's so funny.
Yeah. Well, and this is what's so tricky about living today, I think, because what we have to understand is the Bible teaches that wisdom comes from having true, proper foundational beliefs, right? The Proverbs say that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And to not believe that God exists and to begin with the premise that there is nothing to fear, there is no real morality. Like we can just sort of look at human nature and discern what kind of morality we want to create. We're going to have to, as Nietzsche says, we're just going to have to create our own morality. That gives incredible conceit to very intellectually advanced people, and then allows them to begin to build their entire understanding of reality on a false premise, a false foundation. And that is what's happened to every single one of these universities, is that they start from a false premise that there is no God, that we're going to have to somehow divine all of our beliefs from looking at, basic human nature or certain like philosophical systems. And then they start to build on this foundation where there is no fear of the Lord in the basement. And in that Iowa church, you have people that actually fear the Lord at the foundation of their lives. Like they say, I'm going to stand before a righteous God who has delivered to me a clear definition of what good and evil is. I'm going to need to take responsibility for each of my actions. That is the beginning of wisdom. And when you have that, you can begin to grow in wisdom and desire to please the Lord, and know that everything that you're doing is God is watching, right? God is evaluating you and what you're doing. And this creates within you a framework of morality that is not inside of you, right? It comes from the outside. It comes from divine revelation, and that you have to grow in your understanding of it, and you have to constantly engage in this internal battle between these desires that you have, these good intentions that you want to see happen, and also understand that your own mind could be deceived at a foundational level and cause you to believe very advanced things that are basically wrong. And so you have these places that are the reason to go to university is for wisdom. Like that's the number one reason why you would spend 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, right? And even if you go for some other reason, even if you're like, hey, I don't really care about all that, I just want to get the technical skills to become a doctor or a lawyer. The problem, of course, is that these are liberal arts educations. You are going to be forced to sit through at least 2 years worth of classes that are designed through literature classes, through sociology, through psychology, all these classes that really make up a liberal arts education. They're designed to create the kind of person who can function in a liberated way. In other words, have the freedom in a free society to be liberal or to be liberated. And so, but the way that these secular universities have done that is they want to start from the premise there is no God, which is to completely destroy their project from the very beginning. Because now all of the things that they're teaching you about how to be a liberated person are actually handing you over to the slavery that's inside of you, because it's deifying these evil desires that are coming, or this confused understanding that I'm never going to have to stand before God. I don't need to fear the Lord. There is no judgment. There is no right and wrong. And so the deeper you go into a university with those premises, the more foolish you become. And that's why the smarter you are, and you live inside of this framework, the more foolish, the less wise you grow. And then we're like, oh, we should send all of our children to those institutions to learn wisdom. And we don't see the contradiction. We don't see that this is going to obviously create huge problems. There might be some small percentage of kids who can go through that process and come out the other end even more strongly rooted in Scripture, more strongly inspired by the fear of the Lord, more desiring to please God, and understanding those basic understandings of reality. But it's likely not to happen. And this is why just before this comment he made, Harvard led the way. Our greatest institution for wisdom, on October 8th, before Israel had done anything to respond to what had happened on October 7th, we had something like 30 different student groups all pledging their support for Hamas or the Palestinians before Israel even responded. How do you become so foolish? Why did it start at Harvard? Like that is so important to understand, that there's something at the foundation of these institutions that is making them foolish. And I think one of the things I love about Prager is he just puts his finger right on it. Like he's like, it's not about goodness, it's about wisdom. And they have destroyed their ability to find wisdom, yet they still are highly intelligent in that they have a lot of intellectual horsepower. So they're able to construct whole systems of thought devoid of wisdom, which takes a lot of intelligence. And so that's kind of where we're left.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I keep on thinking like, what is the vehicle, I guess, we're supposed to receive wisdom, and just what to do on a daily basis in the world, what decisions should we make? I think is meant to be the family and the community. Um, but those are some of the biggest things that have broken down as of late. Um, and so now we're getting our morality and our beliefs from larger society, these institutions. And I think that's so interesting that he said that there is no a wise secular institution.
Yes, that was fascinating.
That
I've
is
never heard
so
anybody say that
fascinating.
before.
Yeah, that's crazy, and
Yes.
I'm bound to agree with him. Um, but yeah, I just keep on thinking how important it is to have a strong family and a strong community so that you are able to teach your children and maybe even on some degree heal yourself from some of these societal beliefs. Um, because the beginning of wisdom is God, and
Yeah.
um, we are meant to learn about Him through those around us, through our family, our parents, the people who are primarily supposed to teach us. And I think it's so damaging that we've had generations where we have been learning wisdom from teachers, from strangers, and professors. Um, and I think that is so damaging that we grow up in that way. And I think you will either grow up jaded or have this strange optimism and utopianism and belief that socialism and communism is the way, like just these things that um, aren't wise.
Yeah.
And I think that's so, it's very interesting to think about, but I think I'm bound to try and think like, what is the alternative? Like how are we supposed to grow up? Like how are we supposed to gain this wisdom? And I think that is the answer
Right.
for your smaller community. And I think our founding fathers had a lot of wisdom in that where they, at the beginning, they were really trying to create the ability for that, having small states, having smaller government, govern over smaller amounts of people, because I think they knew on some degree you're not supposed to have a huge government telling you what's right and what's wrong.
Right.
Like,
Well,
yeah,
the
so
problem is in the human heart. Then the only thing that can actually address that is something that can actually get down into that individual level. So things like
absolutely.
families, small churches, disciple making, apprenticing, the way that Jesus did in the Gospels, like those are the only tools that will work. You can't have some giant bureaucracy that's trying
Mhm.
to rule over 100 million people somehow get down to what's going on inside of the human heart of this person and why it's inspiring them to do evil. Like that's the wrong tool for that job. But if you think that that's where the evil's coming from, people don't have a problem with evil, they just their heart's good, and then this huge bureaucracy just needs to be structured properly, and then it's going to lead to that. As long as we share the wealth, we get rid of inequality, then people will magically become more moral. No, I want to pressure test the idea that he said a little bit because I think it's true as well. But it's a fascinating assertion that there are no wise secular institutions, but there are wise secular individuals. There's something that when you get together as an institution and then have to do what institutions are forced to do, which is consensus building. When you are forced to do consensus building inside of an institution, we have to function together. We have to have the same aim. We have to be operating from the same foundation, and it's going to be secular at its nature, at its foundation. I think what that creates is it's impossible for you to, as an institution, properly understand morality, good and evil, or even
Hmm.
beauty. Because if good or evil come from, and if morality stems from belief in God, and this is what Dostoevsky famously said, right? Without God, anything is permissible. And this is why I think that when Solomon says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, you have to you sort of remove the element that is going to lead to wisdom for the institution at the inception of the institution, or as soon as you begin the consensus building process. Saying we are a secular institution says you have to leave that at the door. It's almost like if you had a bunch of people come together to create the perfect society to understand math, but you said, okay, but you have to understand one thing about our institution. You can't bring logic, linear logic into this. We can only derive our understanding of math without recourse to rationality or logic or linear logic. Well, you've sort of removed from the institution the only tool that would be required for you to actually attain your aim. And so I think that this is what's so difficult for secular institutions. Once they define themselves as secular, they now have removed the foundational element that's going to cause them to head in the right direction, to actually understand or perceive reality as it really is, right? To understand wisdom and what is causing the problems that there really are, and many of these institutions are attempting to solve. And this is such an incredible like belief, because then all of a sudden you would say, look, we have to form um, Christian institutions, or uh, institutions that respect divine revelation. I used to think the only real argument for that was that, well, yeah, maybe these secular institutions will corrupt us, but if we could just become a part of those institutions and be like salt and light inside of those institutions, then maybe it's better for us to actually try to stick with those institutions and be in them. Why would we remove ourselves? Isn't Jesus telling us to be salt and light? Isn't he saying be in the world but not of the world? But what Dennis Prager is saying is the problem is it's never going to be a fair fight. The institution itself has already given itself over to corruption, and it can only move in one direction, because at the very beginning they're forcing you to leave your religious convictions at the door. And if that continues to be a necessary element of the consensus building at the foundation of the institution, then it'll never achieve wisdom. And therefore, the only way for you to get things done is to form a new institution that allows for your basic foundational beliefs to be Christian or Judeo-Christian.
Are you following us on Facebook and Instagram yet? Look up @Family Teens to get even more free content and never miss out on event announcements.
And I think that our government as well is moving towards that, because I think separation of church and state is important, but I think we've become obsessed with that, to where things like abortion are very tied in with like Christianity. If you are against abortion, then you must believe that every life is inherently valuable because you're created in God's image, and like these things. It used to just be that way, like with the Judeo-Christian values that were infused into society without you having to necessarily be Christian. People just acknowledge that as a truth of morality. Everyone has value, therefore don't murder. But now it's becoming so skewed, and it scares me a little bit with things like abortion that are being seen as purely a religious
Right.
issue. Like anyone who is against it is religious, that kind of thing. That is where it starts to break down for me, because that our government being so separated from God means it will be separated from wisdom
Yeah.
and just morality
Yes.
as a whole.
Well, I think it's really important to take a step back from the abortion debate, when you realize that murder itself categorically is a Christian category. And I think this is part of the problem. This was the case
Exactly.
you made earlier. He's like, murder, if you look at societies pre-Christian or before they encountered Judeo-Christian values, they were not against murder. And they had good reason not to be against murder. There's so many good reasons to murder if you if you are not given a direct injunction from the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not kill, right? And so I think that what secular society is bumping up against is there's incredibly good arguments for murdering these babies. And so if we can sort of like calm down some of our Judeo-Christian, leftover ethical intuitions by just redefining it as pro-choice or whatever, but it's fascinating. Oftentimes these, especially these girls in these debates with that about abortion, it takes about 20 seconds usually for a decent debater to ask a couple of questions before they realize that there really is no difference between killing a baby in the 8th month and killing a baby, 8 minutes after it's born.
Yeah.
And once they're faced with that, it's so many times I'm watching these things, it's like they've nobody's ever even pointed that out to them. Like, it's like, what? Like, no, it's not born yet. It's like, it's so, I think that it's so dementing to the conversation. And instead of saying, look, I understand I understand why you're pro-murder, and most people are pro-murder that don't believe the Bible. It's important that you understand that as a Christian, I can't be pro-murder. Like I have a reason. I respect the fact that you're going to be pro-murder. And I think that if we form an institution, to get back to what Prager is saying here, that is attempting to figure out how to build the best society, but one of its basic elements is it has to be secular. That eventually is going to be pro murder in all kinds of ways that I'm just not going to be able to go along with. And when they ask me, like, well, Jeremy, what's wrong with that? Why can't you go along with this? There's so many benefits to murder in this case. Well, I'm going to say, well, I have to concede. Yeah, there are benefits to it. That kind of is irrelevant. I am morally obligated to be against murder because of my faith in God. Because
Right.
I'm going to stand before a God. I'm going to stand before the judgment seat of God, and I not only want to, I not only am obligated to follow His moral injunctions, I desperately want to. Like I want to say with David, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord. Like that idea that I even want my thoughts, my inmost thoughts to be pleasing. I'm not just trying to say, what can I get away with ethically, and still stand before God and somehow have a chance to not be condemned. I want to be pleasing to you, God. I believe that your ways are higher than my ways. And so I'm bringing into this secular institution a completely different, I bring all of who I am and all of divine revelation and all of my moral intuitions from my faith are always going to be 100% operative in every institution I'm a part of. And if you say, no, you can't do that. This is a secular institution. All of those intuitions that are based on religion, based on divine revelation, they do not belong here. Well, I'm going to have to bow out. Like I'm sorry guys, I'm out. Like this, you are going in one direction. Even if you're able to, through having this leftover sort of Christian intuitions, you're able to continue for 10, 20 years in a ethical direction that I would recognize. Eventually, it will become corrupted. It's just a matter of time. And one of the things that Prager says to Constantine and the other guy in this video, I thought fascinating. They both said, we don't believe in God, but we have all these intuitions and we have a lot of respect for your religious beliefs and your faith, but we're essentially secular. And he looks at them and says to them, basically, he's like, you guys have a lot of wisdom and you have respect for, you're basically conservative. Your grandchildren will all be leftists. he's like, you don't have a good foundation to pass that on to the next generation, and your children will not have a good foundation to pass that on to your children and grandchildren are at the mercy of these forces, because you do not have in your framework, there's not a logical consistency to what you believe, because what you believe is too based on beliefs, faith-based beliefs that you don't share. So you're not going to have the mechanism to pass that on to your grandchildren. And so you may be conservative now, but you're birthing leftists, essentially. He told them. And I was like, again, that's another fascinating assertion that does seem to play itself out over and over and over again. And so, yeah, any last thoughts on this?
Wow. I'm gonna have to chew on all of this. This is so interesting. But yeah, I guess the whole thing about the government, like it's so hard to know how committed they're supposed to be to this moral system. Especially when issues like abortion and things like that come up. It's very difficult. Like the whole reason we think that murder is wrong is because of the Bible, like you said.
Right.
So how committed to that should we be? I think that makes it a lot more difficult, especially nowadays. It's there's just so many more issues that probably the founding fathers didn't foresee because of how just crazy this world has developed. So I guess I wonder like how separated church and state have to be in terms of ideals and in terms of wisdom and morality and things like that, because the only government I can support is one that is wise and makes decisions based off of morality and what's right. So
Right.
it makes me, that's kind of what I'm going to be thinking about, I think, going away from this conversation.
Yeah.
And just the other vehicles that we are given wisdom through, I was also thinking of stories. I feel like stories is another
Yes.
one that we glean truth and wisdom from. And so that's another important thing, I guess, for listeners, kids, just your own kids, when I have kids, what stories we give them are very important as well. We always talk about that. We love talking about stories,
Yes.
but I think that's another vehicle that wisdom is transported with. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of all of that. So, it's a lot to think about. But yeah, at the root of things, because of our inherent bend toward evil, it's so important to have the close checks and balances with your family and with your community to
Yes.
constantly be able to bounce off of other people, make sure that they can call you out, um, because no one's perfect. And it's just so much better to have a smaller support system to be able to check in on each other instead of a big government who's trying to please everyone and
Yes.
all of that stuff.
Yeah. So good. Yeah. Really think about, there are these really, really deep foundational beliefs. When you're having a discussion with somebody, it's really useful to stop and just say, hey, do you think that people are born basically good? Or do you think that people are born with kind of an inclination towards evil?
Hmm.
Again, they're not as evil as they possibly could be. I mean, some Calvinists would say that, but yeah, what do you basically believe? Do you hold to a biblical anthropology, that is a biblical understanding of humanity, that we do come, as it says in Genesis 3, as it says in Genesis 6 that Dennis Prager quoted, whoa, the inclinations of their heart are constantly towards evil. This is, God sort of declaring this before the flood. And then of course, Paul, in Romans 3, he just probably gives the most extreme, clear articulation of the problem in the human heart. It is like so deep. This is our basic theology. We believe that this is something we're struggling with. If you're talking to somebody who doesn't believe that, yeah, you're going to come to radically different conclusions about solutions, radically different conclusions. And so, like you said, yeah, separation of church and state is such a tricky subject. And I think that we went from basically having an amendment, the First Amendment, which is basically like the federal government cannot create an established religion, to a federal mandate in some cases to discriminate directly against religion. That's the
Hmm.
move that is so dangerous, because it forces everyone with strong and foundationally justified, foundationally solid moral intuitions. They're able to defend them. It forces them all out of these secular institutions, and then you're left with something that's going to be inherently corrupted. So, yeah, I love how Prager kind of puts this together, puts his finger on some of these really deep issues. So awesome. Thanks so much, Sid, for jumping on here today.
Yeah, of course, this is great.
Thank you for listening to Jeremy Pryor's podcast. Make sure you hit that follow button so you don't miss out on any future content. Follow Jeremy on Twitter and Instagram, as well as his Substack blog, all linked in the description. See you next time.